Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about 20th Century, which is a sort of prototypical screwball comedy directed by Howard Hawks from 1934, just before the Hays Code was sort of strictly enforced.
Yes.
You hadn't seen this before, neither had I.
I thought I'd seen it. It's one of those films I was sure I'd seen it, but actually it turned out that I hadn't. I mean, you know, I kind of in my head, I must have confused it with, you know, other great Carole Lombard screwballs of the 30s, really.
Yeah. This is the film that kind of launched her, from what I understand.
Yeah, she was a star then. I mean, I've seen her starring... she was in silent films, and I've seen her in some very, very early ones where she's wonderful, right? So I understand that this is the film that launched her as a comedienne, yeah?
Right.
So, and definitely she would achieve a completely different level of stardom. I mean, it's very interesting to see just the title of the film, because obviously it has John Barrymore in 20th Century and then Carole Lombard under the title, right? So you get a sense of what her ranking was, but she was nonetheless quite established by then, yeah?
Right. So we watched this because this was requested by Celia, friend of the podcast, who's been mentioned many, many times before. She's mentioned it to me a number of times, saying it's one of her favourite films, and like she can't be friends with anyone who doesn't like it, and so on and so forth. She's very much like that, you know.
So, are you now going to continue to be friends?
You know, I quite liked it. I quite liked it. I don't think I mean, I probably didn't like it enough for her, but we can probably continue to still be friends. She really loves screwballs, right? And I think what she loves about them is the kind of inversion of sort of of gender dynamics, you know, men kind of getting their egos pricked, women having kind of much higher status, being kind of anarchic, she said to me before. Yes. You know, Carole Lombard has elements of that in this, although I would take issue with the idea that there's male ego pricking to the extent that you see in other screwballs. What I really liked about this, the thing I like most of all, is the performances, the way they draw out kind of subtleties in the dialogue, which is also brilliant. Particularly the two assistants played by Walter Connolly and Roscoe Carnes, who I may have seen things before, but they're just character actors here. They have these little lines of dialogue that are funny to begin with, and then the actors bring out subtleties in them through gestures, through pauses, especially Walter Connolly, who plays... especially Roscoe Carnes, who plays Owen, who's a drunk. I think is wonderful. So all the kind of bits of business that go on during scenes and in between kind of important bits of plot and dialogue, those are the things I think really make this film come alive. That's what I love.
Let's start with the plot. Yeah, why don't you tell us the plot? It's very straightforward.
Carole Lombard is this actress, well actually she's a model, Mildred Plotka, who...
She's a lingerie model. Mildred Plotka.
Yes. And she's kind of basically in the company, in an acting company, run by John Barrymore. Oscar Jaffe is his character's name, who is pompous and full of himself, and he loves the theatre and all this kind of stuff. And he basically picks her out of nowhere, gives her a new name, Lily Garland, and then transforms her into an actress, a star.
A Bernhard.
Yes, that's right. Through essentially kind of abuse and talking down to her. There's this wonderful bit of business at the start about putting a drawing on the ground, chalk marks to say you walk here, and then in the next line of dialogue you walk here and here and here. And, you know, then you cut and the floor is covered in chalk. It's wonderful.
Yes.
But he manages to successfully transform her into a star. You cut to 3 years later, and she's very, very unhappy. And she's kind of acting out and starting to stand up for herself against the way she's treated by him. And she essentially leaves to go to Hollywood. And the kind of back half of the film then is a chance encounter between the two of them, having split up for some time now, on a train called the 20th Century that runs from Chicago to New York. And it's there's a kind of chamber play aspect to the whole second half of the film, really, where you just know that it's all going to kick off and it becomes a real farce almost.
Well, not almost, it is a farce.
Yeah.
It's a farce through and through. And I loved it. I was watching it yesterday, and I was laughing out loud at several times and catching me completely by surprise. And actually, I think anybody who's interested in acting really should see John Barrymore in this, because it's such an extraordinary performance. It's farcical. He's playing farce, but he does all these double takes, all these. I mean, sometimes on somebody else's line, he'll just pop his eyes that he can't believe what he's saying, and it's so funny, right? So it's he's getting laughs where there aren't any in the dialogue, actually, just through his reaction. And it's just absolutely brilliant, it's the way that he goes with it, really.
Was he known for comedy?
Well, he was considered the greatest actor of his day, right? He was already legendary. This film is drawing on one of his previous great successes, which was Svengali. A couple of years earlier, there had been a film called The Royal Family of Broadway, which he and his brother and sister Lionel and Ethel Barrymore sued because it was so clearly based on them. Yeah, they were like a theatrical dynasty. Yeah, people who'd been kind of actors since the 19th century, and in this particular case, all three brothers were famous, like super famous. Yeah. And John Barrymore was the most famous of all, right? Partly because of his looks. He also had been like the greatest Hamlet of his day. He turned Hamlet into a big Broadway success, right? So we're already looking at him in, kind of way past middle age. He was already having problems with drunkenness and, and stuff like that. So, his career would deteriorate kind of quite badly from here until he died in I think 41 or something like that, early 40s. But he was recognized as a great actor with a huge range, like from Shakespeare to, in this case, farce.
Right.
I love Barrymore. I think it's kind of genius acting. Actually, it's very interesting because I was watching The Devil's Disciple. I'm going through a Burt Lancaster kick. I'm seeing all the films in alphabetical order. I'm very impressed that someone like Burt Lancaster, who's not a genius actor, but nonetheless, he's got this American vitality and energy and daring. So, I was noticing that in the 50s, or from the late 40s to the late 50s, he'd done Arthur Miller, Inge, Tennessee Williams, Terence, is it Rafferty? The British playwright. I mean, he'd done all the great dramatists of his day, right? And in this film, The Devil's Disciple, it's got Laurence Olivier. So it stars Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, and Laurence Olivier. And Kirk Douglas is fantastic, right? He gives this great flamboyant, charismatic, film performance. Burt Lancaster plays a minister who then becomes a man of action. So his role is more physical, really, and it plays on his star persona. But Laurence Olivier, they had gone to a great deal of trouble to get Laurence Olivier because he was universally acknowledged to be the greatest actor of his day. And he is just awful. He's just awful, right? Like, he's a really busy, florid actor, right? So, he gives he has one line and he gives it 20, different kind of facial expressions. And, every line is thought through. So every word is given, a different intonation, right? And, to me, he seems awful, and particularly in relation to, these movie stars that were looked down upon, but that actually on film are much greater actors than he is on the evidence of this one film. The extraordinary thing about Barrymore is, he's giving a very theatrical performance, a really over-the-top performance. It is meant to be farcical, and yet it's great, yeah? And it's great because it's also kind of unafraid, yeah? Like, kind of, he's not afraid of making a fool of himself. He is going over the top. But then it's a measured performance, right? So, I mean, there's a little bit where he's talking to his manager, right? And he says something, the manager says, I've already talked to, I don't know, Mildred, whatever her name is, for the part, yeah, that Lily Garland has for the moment. And he does this thing with his eyes, right, in the middle of the other man talking. It's just so funny, right? So, kind of all of those tricks of the trade, yeah, kind of all of the double takes. He's not afraid to do clownish bits, right? Like, so yesterday I circulated a GIF of him. He's in disguise because he's got no money and he's got to take a train. So, and the police are after him. So he's in disguise, and then he goes into the suite of the 20th century, and then he's thinking and he just touches his nose and it goes long. Yeah, and the way that he pretends to be unaware of what he's doing, it's just so funny. It's such a funny bit of clownish business.
He's extremely good, and he's very inventive, and as you say, unafraid. And I think it's also a very generous role to have been given. Because the central joke in his character is that he is overacting more than anyone, but his character looks down on acting, basically. He says, "Oh God, imagine me an actor," he says when he takes that disguise off, lowered to this. But of course he is overdoing it more than anybody else. And it's the way he speaks as well. He speaks in a very purple kind of prose sort of I can't recall any of the lines of dialogue, but they are as florid as you might imagine them to be.
He's brilliant. I wish I could remember the lines of dialogue, actually. And this is where I think I should see it again, because they are brilliant. And actually, what I really love about this film, which I think is very 30s, yeah, because it's really hard-boiled as well, yeah. It's like, kind of everybody's a crook on the make, or you're fired, you're hired, you're on the street, but I need you, right? Like, so there's a real hard-boiled element to it. And actually, there's what I also love is the intelligence, and this is in comparison to our moment where, I think, people are so proud of being stupid, right? Well, this is a film that delights in being smart. That pokes fun at everything. Yeah, and actually, part of poking fun at everything is also thinking you're smarter than they are and superior to what they are. But also this assumption that the audience is just as smart as you are.
Yeah, that's something that I think actually throughout Screwball is something that I really like. The idea that you, as an audience member, are expected to keep up.
Yes.
That's something that this film has.
Everybody talks fast. Everybody talks smart. Everybody's on the make. It's very unsentimental about people, right? It's very unsentimental about love.
Oh yeah.
It's very unsentimental about friendships. Everybody's on the make. Everybody's using somebody. Yeah, like it's a hard look at people. But also it's kind of affectionate and endearing and unafraid. I mean, can you imagine a scene now where, two things stand out, right? The guy who's escaped from the asylum, who's putting up all those posters of Jesus saves, or what is it?
Repent now?
Repent. You'd have all the religious right on your ass in a moment, right? And they start campaigns again. Well, they don't care. They don't give a shit, right? So, yeah, just to poke fun. And actually, the person is meant to be in a way kind of quite endearing. So, kind of you're not meant to hate the person who's putting up those posters, But nonetheless, it's a fantastic gag, right? It's a fantastic gag that runs throughout, that's aimed at a particular group that's seen as unwashed and uneducated and unthinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
and arrogant above their station as well. That's the kind of thing about the stickers, isn't it? Going on board the train, assuming to tell people their business.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and the way that that's used repeatedly. So you think the joke is dead, and then somebody will turn their back and the sticker will be on their back and you laugh again. So I loved all of that.
How well do you think it fits in to other Screwballs?
I'm not sure, because all the Screwballs that I can remember and love best all have a woman at the center.
And the center here is very much John Barrymore.
Exactly. So
I also think it's interesting that at the end of this, he wins, really. That's or certainly the way I see it. You know, he ends up tricking her into signing that contract, and then he ends up with her
Yes.
back under his thumb. But she now knows more, and she's kind of wiser to it. But she ends up having been sort of desperate and subjugated by him again, which is not something I would associate with screwball generally. Generally you would probably see the man win out less.
Well, but the thing is that the man wins out less. But when you were saying that he isn't pricked, I think he is. You know, because that whole scene at the end is he needs her.
True.
Yeah, he's completely destroyed, you know, without her. He's got no other hope than, you know, for her to join his play, right? So, you know, all his ideas of himself and so on, like, they, you know, they finally changed. He recognizes his need for her. So I think an equality is restored in something that starts as very unequal. She's Mildred Plotka, the lingerie model. He's the great famous wizard of Broadway. By the end, they are equal.
I would agree with that, apart from the point that after you get off the train and you have that final scene back in the theatre and he reverts to his old ways of the way you're talking down to her, like that to me says the equality of, he realises that he needs her and that's why he begs and tricks her. Has now that he's sort of won that battle, he's able to, you know, go back to the way he was. So that equality is disrupted again.
I don't see it that way, because at the beginning, she's a lingerie model and he's the Svengali, right? At the end, he's the director and she's a temperamental actress wearing furs who starts fighting with him from the very beginning. So actually, you know, they start fighting. That's... Yeah. So it's not that I'm telling you what to do, where to walk, how to talk. I'm going to put a pin cushion up your bum to get you to scream properly. It's not like that at all.
No, sure.
Right? So I think there has been a change. Though I agree with you that the Carole Lombard character is not the central character. And it's not even like in some of the other screwballs that I love, like It Happened One Night, where there's a real equality. Yeah, it's a real kind of, you know, it revolves around the couple, right? This is really more about John Barrymore.
And the part that she plays in his life, as opposed to the parts they play in each other's lives.
You know, she's extraordinary, I think, because, I mean, she's not as good as he is in terms of line readings, inflections, but you know, she's so game. Yeah, she's it's hard to imagine a major star of the period just giving herself up to this silliness like that, right? She goes in wholeheartedly into everything, and of course she has to be one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen, right? And there's a moment where she's wearing that gold lame dress to go out with her hair frizzed up and wearing a bandana. That has to be one of the most glamorous images, really. Yeah, it's so she makes a kind of impact visually, that he doesn't, and that brings a kind of an equality to them as well. Yeah. So you know, he's brilliant at acting it out. She's just like a magical presence, really, like, you know, kind of almost glowing on screen. I think, you know, particularly with some of those outfits. So I must check who designed them, actually. You know, kind of the gold lame one looked like a Travis Bantam, but I'm not sure. Can we check to see who designed those dresses? Because they were amazing.
I'll have a quick look for you. There'll be information on IMDb, I'm sure. Give me a second. Costume design by Robert Kalloch. Kalloch. Brackets gowns, brackets uncredited. That's what IMDb has.
Right, okay. Fine. They were fantastic.
I don't know what else. Maybe I could just have a quick look what else he... yes, he's done fucking everything. Although he does seem to be credited all the time as Kalloch, gowns. He's a gowns guy, it seems. Okay. On every film. So there's that.
Okay.
He's your gowns.
I don't know him, really.
He's your gowns hero. It's probably more of a problem with me than a problem with the film, that I started to kind of fall out of love with it when the film developed into making Barrymore and Lombard the same person. That's the kind of central conceit, is she turns out to be as bad as him, and they're kind of as objectionable as each other, and that's why they're perfect for each other. That's ultimately that's the resolution, really. He makes her into one of him, and then they need each other, because there are, I suppose there are sort of three central setups, three acts really. There's the rehearsal at the start where he discovers her and starts to make her who she is, and then there's 3 years later where she is rejecting that, and then there's the whole train sequence. And in that second act, I really liked her. I was 100% with her, because I thought she is like, there's this thing about it's maybe it's not stated, but it's very heavily implied that the two of them have been in a sexual relationship as well as an actor, as well as a director-actor relationship in this time.
Well, I mean, you get the sense they've been living together for 3 years. I mean, that's why it's pre-code. They've been living in sin.
Yeah. I mean, that seemed very clear to me. And there's this thing about, like, she says, I'm gonna go out to the Ritz or the Mayfair Club. It'll be the first good time I've had in 3 years, and that, there's an implication there. And there's a whole aspect to her there, which is about not taking any more of this bullshit, any more of this abuse. And when he comes in, he kind of storms his way in, and they have an argument. He is not only acting over dramatic as he normally does, but he is sort of threatening her with emotional blackmail. This thing about jumping out the window, and what a victim I am. And the moment that she goes, fuck you, I'm not having any of that, I don't believe a word of it, jump out the window if you want, I know you won't. I'm like going, yes, exactly, you are the fucking best, right? I love this woman. And so when you get to the train, and she's had this situation in Hollywood where she thinks so much of herself now, and she's become as bad as him, I started to fall out of love with the film, really. And it's, and it's like, I can only put it down to wanting the character to be different to what she turns out to be. But I do think that it's not just that I wanted it to be different, but that in the conceit of those two turning out to be as awful as each other, the film wants to be charming about it. It wants it to be charming, and I didn't find it charming. So I think it maybe fails for me there.
Oh, you see, I found it charming because the whole film is poking fun at the theatre and theatrical types. Right, and they are extreme versions of those theatrical types, and it is meant to be a farce. It's not meant to be like realistic, in that respect. So actually, it's true that they have almost, no redeeming features except their talent. I mean, the film begins by showing you that they're egomaniacs, right? Like the very first image that you see in the film is, what's his name? Jaffe.
Jaffe, yeah. His name's on that poster outside the theatre like 8 times.
Yeah. Jaffe presents, Jaffe directs, Jaffe, the great Jaffe.
Yeah.
So like.
But the thing is, the joke about that is on him from the start, as you say. It becomes who she is, and I think that in doing that, the film wants them to play, or wants that to play as charming. I think. Charming is probably the best word, because it can't possibly play as appealing, because you can't like these people. But I think it wants you to get more fun out of their play of each other than I did.
It's poking fun at them.
Yeah.
Right. So, of course she becomes like him because she becomes a big star and she becomes completely obsessed and, and so on and so forth. And, but I think you are meant to find that charming and endearing, right? Because it's people's idea of the theater that is being made fun of. I mean, you're not saying these are ideal people, you're saying this is theatre.
No, absolutely. I'm not for a minute saying I think these are supposed to be ideal people or I want them to be, anything like that. Not at all. I get the joke. I just think, for me, in that second half, it fails for me. I think it's aiming for something that I didn't quite feel. That's all.
I loved it. And because also those moments that you're describing are, the moment, I mean, it has moments of both verbal brilliance and acting brilliance and, a stringent social commentary. The thing with the actors who have, performed in the, the Oberau, whatever the theatrical, the passion play. I mean, it's so funny. They're stuck in America. And actually, the idea of, you know, her offering her this great role that he's partly making up, you know, and it's Mary Magdalene, who, you know, is like the greatest whore in history.
Yeah.
That's how I see you. You know?
Yeah. It's true.
I mean, it's very funny.
Yeah, no, I found it funny. But the thing is, like I say, for me, it is about the business in between the main thrust of what's going on. That's what I found really funny. Like I say, those two assistant characters who I pointed out at the start, Owen and Oliver, I think one of the reasons that I like them so much is that they are the kind of... They're the wink to the audience that, oh my God, my boss is insufferable. You know,
Yes.
like and because I find him equally insufferable, I'm with them. You know, so every moment of their being tired of what they have to put up with is a moment of joy for me.
Yeah, but that's, I think, also, so you see, I agree with you, but I would value that differently.
Okay.
Because actually, I think that's part of the genius of the film. Yeah, because at the heart of this film, at the very center, you have two people that in your real life you wouldn't put up with for a second. They are both insufferable, right? Like, yeah. And actually, this is also part of John Barrymore's genius as an actor, because he knows he's playing someone insufferable, right? Like, you know, he's making you laugh at him, right? Yeah. So the whole film is about these complete egomaniacs, right? You know, that you're not meant to like. Yeah, you're meant to laugh at them. Right, and the actors know that, and they give themselves entirely to be laughed at, right? So it's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I do still think the film wants you to get something slightly different out of them. It definitely wants you to get that out of them. I mean, don't get me wrong; like they are pompous and there to be laughed at. But I did still feel the film was asking me to feel something in addition to that, which I didn't. But maybe I'm reading something into it that is not there really.
The film is very interesting to look at because it's written by Ben Hecht and Charlie MacArthur, right, who were newspapermen, and in fact their big famous success was The Front Page, which they then kind of redid as His Girl Friday. So you can see similarities in that quickness, that intelligence, that, you know, lack of sentimentality in all of those three works, really. And of course, again, you know, His Girl Friday is one of the great kind of screwballs as well. I prefer that to this. So, you know, I also wouldn't rank this as one of the greatest screwballs. I mean, you know, I have other preferences. But actually, I really like the harshness of this one, you know, because if you see some of the others, like The Awful Truth or what they called like comedies of remarriage, you know, they're intelligent, but they're also romantic, right? And characters are brought together, you know, in a different way. This is kind of heartless.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it remains heartless throughout. And I like that about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the truth.
The last thing I wanted to mention is that is maybe lost on us, right? Because, you know, do you have any idea what the 20th century was?
Yeah, well, so I know that it was, like I say, this kind of luxury train liner, I suppose, that went between Chicago and New York. But as to what it signified, I suppose, well, luxury.
Yeah, but it's important to underline because that's one of the attractions of the film. And that's why the film is called like that. So it was the equivalent of the jet set flying on the Concorde 10 years ago or, 30 years ago or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's the place, it's the train that movie stars would take from New York to LA. And they always switched trains in Chicago.
Right.
So, and it was very famous.
Was that like so you could be seen?
No, it's not that. It's just that it was very expensive. It was very luxurious, you know, and also it was so long that you had to switch trains in Chicago. So for the plot of this narrative,
Yeah.
Jaffe is in Chicago. She's coming from LA. You know, that's where they meet. Yeah, they end up getting together on the way to New York, right? And I forget what it was. It was like a 3-day journey or something like that, right? So yeah, so people had sleeping cars, and yeah, so and there's a whole talk of that in the film, and so for an audience, that would have been a fantastic attraction to actually see the inside of. Those places that movie stars traveled on, right? Kind of when they traveled, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So it was like an early form of MTV Cribs.
a little bit like, yeah, it was an attraction, right?
Yeah.
It was like, kind of movies in the 1950s showing you Paris or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it was, one of the selling points of the film was that it was the 20th century. And it's something that, like, was so famous that most people in America would probably have known what that train was, right? In a way that's inconceivable to us now.
Like the Orient Express, I suppose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
But the difference with the Orient Express is that the 20th century was always associated with movie stars,
Right.
with glamour, and yeah, it was like kind of how the movie stars traveled,
Whereas the Orient Express is associated with murder.
and royalty.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad I've seen this, especially because Celia's been asking me to watch it for such a fucking long time, and now I can say that I have. I can see sort of what the attractions are. I did think one or two things lacked for me, but in the dialogue, in the way that the dialogue is brought to life by the performance, I think there's no greater pleasure in this. That is its strength. I had a really good time.
I think any student of acting, must really see John Barrymore. I think what he does here is completely extraordinary. It's kind of, a work of genius to be able to do these things. And then, of course, you can completely understand why from this moment on, Carole Lombard would become one of the greatest stars of American cinema. She's luminous and beautiful and, and striking. Actually, one of the things that I did think about this film, which I think about Hawks in general, actually, there are situations in Hawks that remain vividly memorable, right? So the dinosaur falling and Cary Grant holding Katharine Hepburn by the hand as she swings. But there are very few images that I find memorable, yeah? Like, so there isn't a shot or a camera move that you go, wow, right? Like, yeah. But actually, in this film, I think Carole Lombard brings that all by herself, kind of, just her in that gold lame dress is something I'll never forget, and it really kind of typifies a kind of a 30s glamour, to me.
It's not just beauty, though, Jose. She's also a good actress.
She's good, though, I've never been able to convince you to be or not to be the whole way through. But
It's not that you've not been able to convince me to. We've just not agreed to. We can watch it tomorrow if you want.
Okay. Well, we definitely should watch it,
we
because if you think she's good here, what she can do with a line for Lubitsch, 6-7 years later, is amazing.
I look forward to it.
She becomes like Barrymore. She gets laughs, out of almost nothing just by intonation, really.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right about her here in terms of performance. She is she is obviously a secondary character to Barrymore, and her performance is worse than his. So worse is not a very good term. Not as good as his. And she gets kind of less out of it, and she's a little bit screamy maybe sometimes. But she also has she has a kind of presence and spirit that is wonderful and stands up against his entirely.
And then energy, and just the way that she throws herself at the role is actually fantastic and fearless, and kind of there's something very you warm to her just by her abandon, yeah. So I love her in this, but I do think just in terms of level of skill, she's not comparable at this point to Barrymore.
No.
Though I think she will become.
Speaking of acting, right? This is a complete non sequitur, but I watched this film Spies in Disguise the other day, which I've been talking about on Facebook because it's not a very good film, right? It's an animated movie from recently, where Will Smith is a spy who turns into a pigeon, right? And that's and it's a perfectly mediocre film. It's animated by Sony or one of those smaller places that don't really have sort of iconic animation to their name like Pixar. But there are things that were really making me laugh, and Will Smith's line readings, especially when he becomes the pigeon version of himself and he's not happy being a pigeon, are genuinely absolutely wonderful. What you say about actors giving themselves to a role, honestly, you can do worse than watch Will Smith or listen to his voice in Spies in Disguise, because he is just magic. He gets the tone completely, and I think it's great. So, like, it's a weird sort of recommendation to put at the end of this, but Spies in Disguise is really good voice acting.
All right. Well, I think this is a marvelous film. I think, what is it now? It's almost 70... No.
1934. So we're 14 years off its 100th anniversary. 86 years.
It's 86 years old, and it still had me laughing throughout. I mean, that is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's particularly harder for comedies, actually, you know, than it is for drama to,
I think you're right.
To
comedy ages more badly. I mean, particularly topical comedy, which this isn't. Topical comedy tends to because kind of the kind of social things that it criticises change dramatically in short periods of time. So this has a better chance of standing up, but still, it is tough for comedy to keep doing that.
Yeah. So I think that in itself is a testament to the quality of the film, you know, that 80 odd years later, here we are laughing at it, you know.
Yeah.
It still succeeds. I think it's amazing.
Sarcasm and kind of sarcastic asides and things like that never stop playing well, I think. And this film is full of those. And it has like a Preston Sturges worked on it, I think.
I think Preston Sturges...
He did a draft when it wasn't accepted, something, but you know, he may have had like lines left in there, and there's something very Preston Sturgesy about the feel too.
Well, I mean, to me, like, you know, Hecht and MacArthur, like, you can see... I mean, Hecht was one of the great screenwriters of the period. He did Notorious for Hitchcock and so on. You know, he was the highest paid screenwriter, I think, of this period. And... you know, Hecht and MacArthur as a team are brilliant, really. So if Sturges added something to it as well, you know, there you have three of the greatest screenwriters of the period kind of working on this film, and it shows.
Yeah, great. So recommended, I think. I don't think it's a revelation. I think this film is known, you know, and it's in like the AFI sort of, it's been canonized, I think. But we just hadn't seen it yet.
But for a lot of people... I mean, you know, my God, I've been like a film critic for 40 years practically, and I still hadn't seen it.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's lots of people, you know, who haven't, and I suppose this is a nudge, you know, that you should.
Yeah, exactly. Good movie.
Okay. So thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify and YouTube to listen to us. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Cheerio.